I'm Tom Mackenzie, Bloomberg TV's China correspondent. We're here at the China Auto Show in the #1 auto market on the planet. There's so much to talk about this year. It is, in a way, a pivotal year for the auto sector because you've got all the moves around electric vehicles, around automation, around wireless technology, and then, of course, you've got the regulatory changes around foreign ownership and the moves that China's government is making to open up the sector here, as well as the trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. There's a lot to talk about. One focal point, and we're going to start off here in the Tesla showroom in the auto show, is that they have, Tesla unveiled their Model 3 for the first time outside the US. Now, they're being quite quiet about exactly what their plans are, but we do know they've been in talks for at least a year over opening a factory in Shanghai, and we know that the changes around foreign ownership here in China mean that possibly Tesla, along with other electric vehicle makers from outside China, may be able to have their own fully owned operations here in China by the end of the year. So Tesla is very much one to watch. Even without that, and even with tariffs and taxes of 25% on their imported Teslas into the Chinese market, they're still doing pretty well here and growing their market share. But it is certainly a company to watch as these regulations change in China. We're going to move on now to some of the other automakers here. It is a vast, vast show, and there is a lot to talk about in terms of what's happening with the foreign automakers, but also with the domestic automakers who are becoming increasingly competitive. There are thousands of exhibitors, tens of thousands of visitors. This morning, or today, is the main day. It runs on through the rest of the week. We've got Tesla here. We're going to move on. We're just in one slice of one of the halls. We're going to move on now to Volkswagen because we've been talking to them. We talked to their CEO yesterday, Dr. Herbert Diess, who, of course, took over from Mr. Muller just a few weeks ago, about their plans for the Chinese market. Interestingly, VW are going to be spending, they said, an additional $18 billion in revamping their operations here in China, along with their state-owned partners, their Chinese partners, particularly around technology, particularly around electric vehicles, and particularly around automation. That's on top of the approximate $40 billion that VW are spending outside of the Chinese market. So this is clearly a big focus for VW and others. We've spoken to BMW, we've spoken to Volvo, we've spoken to PSA, Citroën PSA. They are all making a big play of electric vehicles. China, of course, has said that it's going to close down and stop fossil-fueled cars in this market at some point. They haven't given a timeline, but clearly all the automakers are gearing up for that. So let's take you to the VW stand. VW have said they want to electrify all 300 of their cars, trucks and buses, so they're having to revamp their factories. They're having to focus, of course, on electric powertrains. I want to show you their concept car, which is over here. It's had a few mixed reviews. This is the concept ID Vision. So if we can just push in and get close to this car, it's got these doors that open in the opposite direction at the touch of a button. It's fully electric, this concept car, and autonomous. So this is VW's concept ID Vision on display here at the China Auto Show. Electrified, autonomous. It is, of course, just a concept car, but it's giving a flavor of where VW wants to drive some of its innovation. Not just for the Chinese market, of course, but the global market as well. Let's swing around. We want to take you to the Jeep stand, Fiat Chrysler's Jeep. Just had a question in from a viewer. Sorry, what was the question? The biggest game changer is probably the push around electrification and the fact that you have some of the startup Chinese companies like Byton and NIO who are developing very innovative models around fully electric cars, particularly SUVs, and the fact that the incumbent automakers, the OEMs, are having to play catch-up to some of these Chinese companies, and the fact that China has set out, in terms of regulatory framework, an environment that is pretty conducive to developing the electric vehicle space. This is Jeep's stand. This is obviously part of the Fiat Chrysler company. It's a valuable part of the company. Fiat Chrysler has a joint venture with the Chinese state-owned company called Guangzhou Auto. So Jeep trying to make its presence felt here as well. Off-roading, more Chinese customers want to get involved in leisure activities, want to take their cars out for drives. So off-roading is becoming more popular in China. And even as the economy slows here, looking at maybe about 6.5% growth this year, that's the expectation around that level, you're still seeing demand for high-end cars. You're still seeing huge demand for SUVs and the premium players here. We've talked to the likes of Porsche. They said that they're still very bullish about the Chinese market, even if you see, as you see, overall economic growth starting to slow in China. There is still enough demand from a demographic that has enough cash to be able to spend on those major purchases. Let's take you around to one of these quite unusual cars. It's a concept car by the state-owned Great Wall Company. It's an odd-looking beast, this thing. It's called an Aura. And this has a range of 300 kilometers, they say. It's going to sell for about 20,000 US dollars. They want to sell about 100,000 units when they start rolling them out. It looks like it's designed primarily for city use. We've had another question.
How popular are the electric cars?
People are adopting and moving on to electric vehicles as they know, and as the infrastructure improves, they know that they can travel between A to B without having to constantly recharge. So as the ranges improve, as the battery technology improves, and as their subsidies, even if they're being changed here in China, in some ways the subsidies for electric vehicles are being reduced, there is still the incentives to move into the electric vehicle space. I think a lot of these automakers are proving that in fact you can get the performance and the drive with electric vehicles that you can get with fossil fuel cars. They've wanted to prove that, and it seems that they're breaking a pretty good case of that. And we're going to move down to BMW now, because they're making a big play with a fully electric SUV that we're going to show you. BMW, we spoke to the CEO of BMW, Mr. Kruger, earlier in the day. We talked to him about a wide range of issues, about the changes in foreign ownership. They've got partnerships with two of their joint venture Chinese partners. They say they're not going to change anything on that front. They are currently in talks with the state-owned Great Wall Company about producing their Mini brand here in China. Of course, they produce the bulk of their Minis currently just outside of Oxford in the UK. It's a brand that sells very well in China as well. That's something to watch for. We also talked about the fact that BMW does still lag Daimler in a big way across the global markets. He says he wants to catch up, the CEO of BMW, with Daimler by 2020. A pretty ambitious goal he set himself. I want us to show you their fully electric SUV that they have unveiled. Let's push into this SUV, because this is the BMW iX3.
You're too fast. There's another 8 minutes left. Question.
They want to export this BMW iX3 to, by 2020, they want to start producing these and exporting these, potentially exporting these to the US, which of course is interesting given the trade tensions between Washington and Beijing and the threat that potentially the US will impose tariffs on exports from China. Nonetheless, BMW telling us today that they are looking to build this car, the BMW iX3, here in China by 2020, very likely to export to the US. What is the future for supercars if everyone is going electric? That's one question from one of our viewers. I'm going to show you a Chinese version of a supercar shortly. Look, companies like NIO, they broke a record with their electric vehicle supercar, race car. And they are proving that with the battery technology that is being souped up and the design that's improving and the change in materials, that you can have supercars with electric batteries or electric powered that can compete. But you're still going to want, of course, there's still going to be demand from some for those loud, powerful, fossil-fueled supercars. But they're catching up, they're getting there. So we're going to move on to another pretty unusual Chinese brand, talking of supercars. They're making a play at the young buyer, the city urban buyer. It's a company that is pretty much unheard of, but they've got a pretty unusual concept car we're going to show you. So again, this is so much that CEOs and executives of these auto companies are having to grapple with in terms of the changes, so many of those changes coming from China around electrification, around autonomous vehicles. We've heard about partnerships, for example, with Didi, which is effectively the Uber of China. They've been tying up with some of the big automakers around ride sharing. And we spoke to the CEO of Volvo Cars this morning. They've supplied 24,000 vehicles to Uber as part of their ride sharing business there. And the CEO of Volvo said that he expects ride sharing to be an increasingly important component for his business strategy. So you're going to see, in all likelihood, the big automakers deriving an increasing number of their sales from companies setting up ride sharing, like the Lyfts of this world, the Ubers and the DDs. But what that means about personal purchases of cars, that's the flip side. If you have more ride sharing, personal purchases may go down. Let me show you this very weird and wacky Chinese sports car.
New brand from Asia going to the European.
This is called a Regalo. It's a company that is in Chongqing, the southwestern steamy city in China. They are saying that this is a pure electric race car for the city. They're aiming it at the youth, is what they've said. We haven't got any details from them about the range or the price, or in fact any details about the battery itself. They say that that's still secret. But they tell us this is going to be on the market at some point. Not a company we've ever heard of before, but here we go. There's a lot of ambition here in China. I think we have had another question from one of our viewers.
Any popular car brand in Asia is going to Europe and US market?
So, we've heard from a number of Chinese domestic makers who do have ambitions to start selling their cars into the US and European markets. We know, for example, that the owner of Geely, a man called Li Shufu. Now, Geely is the company that has bought a 10% stake in Daimler. They are the largest shareholder in Daimler, and they also own Volvo Cars. Now, he is someone who is looking at building and selling cars into the European and US markets. So watch for him, Mr. Li Shufu from Geely. Also, we've been speaking last year to one of the executives at Guangzhou Auto. Again, that's the state-run company that has a partnership with Fiat Chrysler. They build a car called the Trump Qi. The Trump Qi. It's an SUV. It's very popular here in China. It's one of the best-selling SUVs. He said that he wanted to sell that into the US. That was last year. Now, with the trade tensions, he's started to walk that back and say that maybe he's going to have to put that on hold. He may also, he said, need to change the name of the car, the Trump Qi, given the controversy around President Trump in the US, potentially a divisive brand name. We have now also Byton, and we spoke to the founder of Byton. This is a company that brought together German engineers, particularly from BMW, with Chinese financing, and it's a pretty potent combination. Byton are building their cars here. They are starting to get those onto the market in 2018, 2019, 2020 into the Chinese market, and they're also aiming to get into the US market. Again, this is around electrification. This is a highly autonomous vehicle, lots of digital, a huge touchscreen display on the front of the Byton vehicle. That's another one to watch. We also spoke to the CEO, the US CEO of NIO. This is, some have said, a contender against Tesla. They're selling a car They're going to have it on sale by the end of 2018, by the end of this year, for about $68,000 again. And an electric vehicle, a lot of innovation, a lot of tech. The CEO of the US part of the company, Padma Warrior, is formerly from Cisco. Her background is very much technology, and she says this is what it's all about. It's about using the car as a device for mobility, and a device for connecting you, and wireless options, very tech heavy for NIO as well. Another one to watch. Let me show you off this brand of car. I believe it's a Chinese company. I don't know anything about this one. It's called the Chen 2. Again, a bit of a striking model. The Chen 2. Don't know if these guys are going to be selling in the Chinese market, let alone the US and European markets. But this is clearly a supercar, high-end, luxury. We know that Rolls-Royce are here. We know that Aston Martin, we're going to be speaking to them later in the day. They're making a big play into China as well. McLaren are making a big play. So high-end and premium still in play, SUVs, and a big focus on electric vehicles. A lot to mull over, as well as the trade tensions, and as well as those steps by the Chinese government to relax curbs around foreign ownership in the Chinese market. This is Tom Mackenzie, Bloomberg TV, reporting from the China Auto Show 2018.